He had everything: wealth that could buy nations, fame that spanned continents, a family that loved him, literary genius that would echo through centuries. And yet, Leo Tolstoy stood at the edge of his estate, rope in hand, ready to end it all. Because despite having everything the world says should make you happy, he discovered a truth so devastating it nearly killed him. Success without meaning is the cruelest form of failure. And in his desperate search to avoid that noose, Tolstoy may have accidentally solved the greatest question humanity has ever asked. What is the meaning of life? But here's what makes Tolstoy different from every other philosopher who tackled this question. He didn't approach it from comfort. He approached it from the abyss. He didn't theorize about meaning while sipping wine in academic halls. He searched for it with a gun in his drawer and death in his heart. Because Tolstoy discovered what most of us spend our whole lives avoiding. When you strip away all the distractions, all the achievements, all the pleasures, life appears absolutely meaningless. And that realization will either destroy you or transform you. At 50 years old, Tolstoy had written War and Peace and Anna Karenina. He was considered the greatest writer alive. He had a loving wife, 13 children, vast estates. By every external measure, he had won at life. And that's exactly when the crisis hit. Because once you've climbed every mountain society tells you to climb, once you've achieved everything you're supposed to achieve, a terrifying question emerges. So what? Tolstoy described it like being in a forest, walking confidently on what seemed like a path, only to suddenly realize you're completely lost. The path was an illusion. The destination was a lie. And now you're alone in the darkness with no idea why you're walking at all. This wasn't depression in the clinical sense. This was something deeper, an existential crisis so profound that it made him question not just his life, but life itself. "My life came to a standstill," he wrote. "I could breathe, eat, drink, and sleep because I could not help doing these things. But there was no life in me because I had no desires whose satisfaction I would have considered reasonable." Think about that. Here's a man who could have anything, and he wanted nothing, because he'd finally asked the question that breaks everything. Why? Why write another book? Why earn more money? Why raise children who will face the same meaningless existence? Why do anything at all when death makes everything pointless? These weren't abstract philosophical questions for Tolstoy. They were daily torture. He hid rope so he wouldn't hang himself. He avoided hunting because he didn't trust himself with a gun. The greatest literary mind of his generation was being destroyed by the one question literature couldn't answer. And here's where Tolstoy's journey becomes revolutionary. Instead of doing what most intellectuals do, building elaborate philosophical systems to avoid the question, he did the opposite. He stripped everything down to its most brutal simplicity. He asked, if life is meaningless, why don't all rational people kill themselves? This question haunted him. He observed that there were 4 ways people dealt with life's meaninglessness. First, ignorance, simply not seeing or understanding the problem. Children and some adults live this way, blissfully unaware of life's ultimate futility. Second, hedonism, knowing life is meaningless but deciding to enjoy it anyway, pursuing pleasure until death. Third, suicide, the logical conclusion for those who see meaninglessness and have the courage to act on it. Fourth, weakness, seeing the meaninglessness, knowing suicide is logical, but lacking the strength to do it. Tolstoy found himself in the 4th category, and it disgusted him. He saw his inability to kill himself, not as life affirmation, but as cowardice. Every day he continued living felt like a betrayal of his own logic. He was trapped in the ultimate paradox, too rational to find meaning, too weak to embrace meaninglessness fully. But then he noticed something that changed everything. The people who seemed most at peace with existence weren't the educated, the wealthy, or the sophisticated. They were the simple peasants working his land. While he was tormented by the meaning of life, they were living it. While he was paralyzed by philosophical questions, They were moving through their days with a mysterious certainty that life was worth living. At first, this infuriated him. How could these uneducated people have solved what the greatest minds couldn't? Were they simply too stupid to recognize life's meaninglessness? But the more he observed, the more he realized something profound. They had something he'd lost: faith. Not just religious faith, but faith in life itself. Faith that existence has meaning, even if you can't intellectually prove it. This began Tolstoy's desperate experiment. If rational thought led only to suicide, maybe the answer lay beyond reason. He started visiting monasteries. He tried to pray. He attempted to believe what the peasants believed. But his educated mind kept getting in the way. He couldn't just accept religious dogma. He couldn't turn off his critical thinking. He was trapped between two impossibilities. He couldn't live without meaning, but he couldn't accept meaning without proof. He studied the world's religions obsessively. Buddhism's escape from suffering attracted him, but ultimately felt like spiritual suicide. Islam's submission to God's will made sense, but its specific doctrines didn't convince him. Judaism connected him to ancient wisdom, but its tribal nature felt limiting. Christianity promised universal love, but the church's corruption repelled him. And then, in this impossible position, Tolstoy had his breakthrough. What if the question itself was wrong? What if asking, "What is the meaning of life?" was like asking, "What is the color of sound?" What if meaning wasn't something you could find through rational analysis because meaning wasn't rational at all? He realized that every time he had felt life was meaningful, holding his newborn child, writing in creative flow, helping someone in need, it wasn't because he'd intellectually understood meaning. It was because he had experienced it. Meaning wasn't a concept to be grasped. It was a reality to be lived. And the moment you tried to capture it in thoughts, it disappeared like trying to hold water in your fist. This led to Tolstoy's radical conclusion. The meaning of life is life itself. Not life as a concept, but life as it's actually lived. Breathing, loving, working, helping, creating. The peasants weren't too simple to see life's meaninglessness. They were too engaged in living to be paralyzed by abstract questions about it. But Tolstoy went even deeper. He realized that the very ability to ask about meaning pointed to something beyond the material world. Why should creatures made of atoms care about purpose? Why should biological machines seek significance? The very fact that we hunger for meaning suggested to him that we're more than physical beings. We're spiritual creatures trapped in material form, and our suffering comes from forgetting our true nature. He wrote, "I realize that faith is not merely the evidence of things not seen," and so on, not revelation that only defines one of the signs of faith, not the relation of man to God. Faith must first be determined, then God, not the other way around. Not an agreement with what one has been told, as faith is most often understood. Faith is knowledge of the meaning of human life, the consequence of which is that man does not kill himself, but lives. This wasn't a return to conventional religion. Tolstoy's faith was stripped of miracles, rituals, and dogma. He believed in God not as a supernatural being, but as the force of life itself, the love that connects all living things. The mysterious ought that makes us seek goodness, even when it profits us nothing. God wasn't something to believe in, but something to align with through how you lived. And how should you live? Here Tolstoy became practical. He observed that the people who seemed most connected to life's meaning weren't pursuing happiness or success or even spiritual enlightenment. They were simply serving, the grandmother caring for her grandchildren, the farmer growing food for others, the teacher passing on knowledge. They found meaning not by solving life's mystery, but by participating in it through love and service. Tolstoy's formula was devastatingly simple. The meaning of life is to serve the life that gave you life. You didn't create yourself. You didn't choose to exist. You're part of something infinitely larger than yourself, and meaning comes from recognizing and serving that larger whole. Not through grand gestures, but through daily acts of love and connection. He identified 5 commandments that formed the core of meaningful existence. Do not be angry. Do not lust. Do not take oaths. Do not resist evil with violence. Love your enemies. These weren't moral rules imposed from outside, but practical guidelines discovered through experience. Each one dissolved a barrier between the individual and the infinite life they were part of. But here's what's crucial. This wasn't a philosophy Tolstoy developed in his study. This was a reality he discovered by nearly dying from its absence. He learned that you can't think your way to meaning. You can only live your way there. And living your way there means abandoning the ego's endless questions and surrendering to life's essential mystery. The transformation in Tolstoy's life was dramatic. He gave away his copyrights. He freed his serfs. He dressed like a peasant and worked in the fields. He established schools for peasant children. He wrote religious and philosophical works that challenged both church and state. But more importantly, he found peace. Not perfect peace. He still struggled, still doubted, still fell short of his ideals, but the fundamental peace of knowing why he was alive. Yet, here's the paradox that tormented Tolstoy until his death. The moment you try to grasp this meaning, to own it, to secure it, it vanishes. It's like trying to save daylight in a jar. Meaning exists only in the living, only in the doing, only in the surrendering. The second you step back to analyze it, you've lost it. This is why the peasants had what the philosopher couldn't find. They weren't looking for it. They were living it. Tolstoy never fully resolved this paradox. He spent his final years torn between his insight and his inability to fully embody it. He knew meaning came from simple living and serving others, but he couldn't entirely escape his complex nature. He preached universal love, but fought with his wife. He advocated poverty, but lived on an estate. He sought simplicity, but remained tormented by complications. His wife, Sophia, wrote in her diary about the man who had solved the meaning of life. There is so little genuine warmth in him. His kindness does not come from the heart, but merely from his principles. His biographies will tell of how he helped the laborers to carry buckets of water, but no one will ever know that he never gave his wife a rest and never, in all these 32 years, gave his child a drink of water or spent 5 minutes by his bedside to give me a chance to rest a little from all my labors. This bitter observation reveals something essential about Tolstoy's discovery. Finding the meaning of life doesn't make you perfect. It doesn't solve all your problems or transform you into a saint. What it does is give you a direction, a purpose, a reason to keep struggling with your imperfections rather than surrendering to meaninglessness. Tolstoy's message to us isn't that he solved the meaning of life. It's that he discovered meaning isn't something to be solved. It's something to be lived. And it's lived through love, through service, through connection to something greater than yourself. Not because a philosophy tells you to, but because your heart knows no other way to beat. He wrote in his final years, "The sole meaning of life is to serve humanity by contributing to the establishment of the kingdom of God, which can only be done by the recognition and profession of the truth by every man." But this kingdom of God wasn't some future paradise. It was the present reality of love actualized in daily life. It was choosing connection over separation, service over selfishness, truth over comfort. The question that nearly killed him became the question that transformed him, not by answering it, but by living through it to something beyond questions and answers, to life itself, in all its mysterious, painful, beautiful meaninglessness that somehow means everything. So, what is the meaning of life according to Tolstoy? It's to stop asking and start living, to stop thinking and start serving, to stop separating yourself from life and start dissolving into it, to recognize that you're not a separate being seeking meaning, but a part of the infinite meaning that is existence itself. The rope that Tolstoy prepared for his neck became the thread that connected him to humanity. The gun he hid from himself became the catalyst for his resurrection. The meaninglessness that almost destroyed him became the doorway to a meaning beyond words. Not a meaning you can speak, but a meaning you can be. Tolstoy died trying to live this truth, leaving his estate at 82, seeking the simplicity he preached, dying at a train station on a journey toward a life aligned with his vision. He never arrived. But then again, maybe arriving wasn't the point. Maybe the journey itself, the struggle, the seeking, the failing, the trying again, maybe that was the meaning all along. His last words recorded by the station master were, "But the peasants, how do the peasants die?" Even at the end, he was looking to the simple people who had shown him the way, who lived meaning without needing to understand it, who died as naturally as they lived, because they never separated themselves from the life that flowed through them. What would happen if you stopped trying to figure out life and started trying to live it? What if meaning isn't waiting at the end of your intellectual journey, but in your next breath, your next choice, your next act of love? What if Tolstoy's greatest discovery was that the meaning of life is to stop torturing yourself about the meaning of life and start participating in the mystery? The question that brought him to the edge of suicide became the question that taught him to truly live, not by solving it, but by surrendering to it, not by understanding life, but by serving it, not by finding meaning, but by being it. This is Tolstoy's legacy, the philosopher who solved the meaning of life by discovering there was nothing to solve, only everything to live, only love to give, only service to render, only the infinite mystery of existence to participate in, one breath at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's everything. Perhaps that's the meaning we've been searching for all along. Not an answer to memorize, but a life to live. Not a concept to grasp, but a reality to embody. Not a problem to solve, but a gift to receive and give and receive again in the endless circulation of existence itself. The meaning of life, you're living it. The question is whether you'll recognize it before it's too late, whether you'll embrace it despite its simplicity, whether you'll have the courage to stop searching and start being. Tolstoy's life says you can. His struggle says it won't be easy. His discovery says it's worth everything. The choice, as always, is yours. But now you know, the meaning of life might just be to stop asking what it means and start living like it matters. Because it does. Because you do. Because this moment, this breath, this choice, this is where meaning lives. Not in the answer, but in the living.